This happened about 5 years ago, and I still think about it constantly. I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in marketing that wasn't doing me any favors in the job market. I was living in this cramped studio apartment in the outskirts of Portland, burning through my savings faster than I wanted to admit. I needed work, any work, and I needed it fast. That's how I ended up on Craigslist at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, scrolling through job listings that ranged from questionable to outright sketchy. Most of them were the usual suspects. Door-to-door sales, pyramid scheme nonsense disguised as entrepreneurial opportunities, that kind of thing. But then I saw one that caught my eye, night security guard for Marlowe Storage. Midnight to 8 a.m., 5 nights a week. The pay was $18 an hour, which back then was pretty decent for what seemed like a straightforward gig. The listing said they needed someone immediately and to call a number if interested. No email, no online application, just a phone number. I called the next morning and spoke to this guy named Dale. He had one of those gravelly voices that made him sound like he'd been smoking since birth. He asked me maybe 3 questions total. Did I have transportation? Yes. Was I comfortable working alone? Sure. Could I start that Friday? Absolutely. That was it. No background check, no references, no formal interview. He just told me to show up at 11:45 p.m. on Friday to meet him for a quick walkthrough, and then I'd be on my own. The whole conversation lasted maybe 4 minutes. I should have known something was off right there, but I was desperate and $18 an hour wasn't something I could afford to turn down. Friday came around and I drove out to Marlowe Storage. Around 11:30 p.m., the place was about 20 minutes outside the city, tucked away on this rural road that didn't have a single streetlight for miles. The storage facility itself was huge, way bigger than I expected. It had to be at least 10 acres of those long metal storage unit buildings arranged in rows, all surrounded by a chain link fence topped with barbed wire. Dale was waiting for me at the front gate, leaning against this beat-up pickup truck and smoking a cigarette. He looked exactly how he sounded. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, with a thick gray mustache and a beer gut that hung over his belt. He nodded at me as I pulled up, flicked his cigarette onto the pavement, and gestured for me to follow him. The walkthrough was painfully brief. He showed me the security office, which was really just a small shed near the entrance with a desk, a chair, a space heater, and a wall of monitors showing camera feeds from around the property. There were maybe 20 screens total, each cycling through different angles every few seconds. Dale explained the job in the most monotone voice imaginable. I was supposed to stay in the office, keep an eye on the monitors, and do a patrol of the entire property once every 2 hours. He handed me a flashlight, a ring of keys, and a clipboard with a checklist of buildings to mark off during patrols. Then he told me something that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. If you see anyone on the property after midnight, don't approach them. Just call the cops and stay in the office until they arrive. I asked him why, and he just shrugged. People try to break in sometimes. We've had issues. Not worth getting yourself hurt over someone else's old furniture. That seemed reasonable enough, but the way he said it felt rehearsed. Like he'd given that exact explanation to every other guard who'd worked here before me. I wanted to ask more questions, but Dale was already walking back to his truck. He told me his number was taped to the desk if I needed anything, and then he left. Just like that, I was alone. The first hour was fine. Boring, actually. I sat in the office, watched the monitors, and tried to get a feel for the place. The camera feeds were pretty standard. Empty rows of storage units, the occasional car passing by on the main road in the distance, nothing unusual. The silence was heavy, though. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The hum of the space heater, the faint creak of the shed settling, my own breathing dot at 2 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and started my first patrol. Dale had told me to follow the checklist in order, which meant starting at the north end of the property and working my way south. The place was a maze. Each building was labeled with a letter and a number, like A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on. There were 10 rows of buildings, and each row had about 12 units. Walking through the facility at night was eerie as hell. My flashlight only lit up a small circle in front of me, and beyond that was just pitch blackness. The motion sensor. Lights above some of the buildings would occasionally flicker on as I passed, which startled me every single time. I kept thinking about what Dale had said. Don't approach anyone. It made me wonder how often people actually did break in and what they were doing here when they did. I made it through the entire patrol without incident and got back to the office around 3 a.m. I checked the monitors again, marked off the buildings on my clipboard, and settled back into my chair. So far, so good, but then around 3:30 a.m., something on one of the monitors caught my eye. It was camera feed 14, which covered the back corner of the property near row J. There was movement. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal, a raccoon or a stray dog, but as I leaned closer to the screen, I realized it was a person. They were standing between two storage units, just standing there, completely still. The camera quality wasn't great, but I could make out enough to see that they were wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. They weren't trying to break into any of the units or anything. They were just standing there, facing the camera. My first instinct was to call the cops like Dale had told me to, but I hesitated. What if it was just someone who rented a unit and needed to grab something late at night? I didn't want to waste the police's time or get someone in trouble for no reason. I figured I'd keep watching for a few minutes to see what they did. The person didn't move. I'm not exaggerating. For a solid 5 minutes, they stood in the exact same spot, completely motionless. I started wondering if the feed was frozen, but the timestamp in the corner kept ticking forward, and I could see a faint breeze moving their hoodie slightly. Then they turned and walked deeper into the property, disappearing off camera. I cycled through the other feeds to try to spot them again, but I couldn't see them anywhere. It was like they just vanished. My heart was pounding at this point, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd left through a back exit or climbed the fence. It was weird, sure, but not necessarily dangerous. I decided to do another patrol. Early, just to check things out. I grabbed my flashlight, the keys, and my phone, and headed out into the facility. I went straight to row J, where I'd seen the person on the camera. When I got there, nothing seemed out of place. The units were all locked, no signs of forced entry, no one around. I checked behind the buildings, between the rows, even looked for footprints in the dirt, but there was nothing. I started to feel a little stupid, like maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it had been an animal after all, and my tired brain had just made it look like a person. I was about to head back to the office when I noticed something strange. One of the storage units in row J, Unit J7, had its lock hanging open. Not broken, not cut, just unlocked and hanging from the latch, like someone had opened it and forgot to close it all the way. I stood there for a minute, trying to decide what to do. Dale had told me not to approach anyone, but he hadn't said anything about checking open units. I figured it was part of my job to make sure everything was secure, so I pulled the lock off, lifted the metal door, and shined my flashlight inside. The unit was mostly empty. There were a few cardboard boxes stacked against the back wall, a rolled-up rug, and an old wooden chair sitting in the corner. But what caught my attention was the chair. There was something on it. I stepped closer and realized it was a jacket. A dark hoodie, to be exact. The same kind the person on the camera had been wearing. My stomach dropped. I backed out of the unit immediately, pulled the door down, and put the lock back on. My hands were shaking as I speed walked back to the office. I didn't run because some irrational part of my brain thought that running would make me look like prey, but I wanted to run. God, I wanted to run. When I got back to the office, I checked the monitors again. Nothing. No one on any of the feeds. I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation. Maybe someone had been accessing their unit, took off their hoodie because they got warm, and then left through an exit I hadn't seen. It was a stretch, but it was the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. I didn't call the cops. I don't know why. I think part of me was worried Dale would be pissed if I made a big deal out of nothing on my first night. So I just sat there, glued to the monitors, waiting for my shift to end. The next few hours were uneventful. I did one more patrol at 6 a.m. and everything seemed fine. Unit J7 was still locked, no other open doors, no people lurking around. By the time 8 a.m. rolled around and Dale came back to relieve me, I was exhausted but relieved. I told him about the person I'd seen on the camera and the open unit, but I left out the part about the hoodie. He just nodded, said it happens. Sometimes, and told me not to worry about it. His lack of concern should have been reassuring, but it wasn't.